Hey, I'm Jamie Poisson, and today on the show, we're going to talk about this small Chinese company called DeepSeek that has really upended the world of AI. If you haven't been following, DeepSeek recently released this large language model that rivals ChatGPT. It shot up to #1 on the app charts. The interesting thing about it is that the company built it really cheap. And that has called into question this narrative that you need an endless supply of chips and data centers and money to develop AI. After people started noticing, the biggest market loss in history ensued. Chipmaker NVIDIA saw its stock plummet 17% on Monday. Microsoft and Google also took big hits. They've since recovered somewhat. Anyhow, wrapped up in all of this is an AI Cold War between the US and China. And as always, we still have lots of questions about where AI is headed and what it's actually good for. I'm going to get into all of that today with Wired's senior tech writer, Zui Young. Zui, thanks so much for coming onto the show.
Hi, glad to be here.
It's great to have you. So let's start with DeepSeek. What can you tell me about this company and where it comes from? I understand it started as like an offshoot of a Chinese hedge fund.
Yes, that is exactly correct. So there has been this Chinese quant hedge fund called High Flyer since I believe it was founded in 2015. It was actually one of the best performing quantitative hedge fund in China. And one thing special about them is that they have been using machine learning to come up with their trading strategy. But the founder of this company called Liang Wenfeng, he has a master's degree in computer science. And as I understand it, he's just himself very obsessed with AI. So in 2023, he decided that, well, we already have a lot of experience in AI, but we wanted to establish a new entity called DeepSeek to really focus on researching like large language models and all the kind of AI technologies out there. So DeepSeek has existed for less than 2 years so far. And it has released quite a few models open source out there to the public. And the latest one released, R1, in January, was the one that really kind of set off the discussions.
Yeah, this is the one that came out just very recently, you said. And just tell me what it is and what it does and then why it is freaking everybody out.
Sure. But what it did with R1 is that it really focused on the reasoning test. So, and people have been familiar with this because OpenAI released their O1 a little bit earlier last year.
Is it fair? Is that like the ChatGPT or?
It is a version of ChatGPT, but this version just really focuses on telling you the train of thought that goes on within the model to come to for it to come to the conclusion. So it's, for example, you tell you a math problem, it's going to tell you every step it takes to get to that answer, which is really appreciated by a lot of people. And what we're seeing with R1 is that it kind of like replicated that train of thought process in there. And if you ask a question to R1 now, it will also show you like the step-by-step calculation or reasoning that gets to the answer.
Could you give me an example of what something like that might look like if I asked it a question?
Sure. Yeah, I've been poking with the model right now. For example, if you ask it, please give me a summary of what's the most important historical events that happened in the 20th century, right? It will actually give you this very human-like reasoning process. They would tell that, okay, I should start thinking about like the first 10 years, first decade of 20th century, and then the second decade of 20th century. And then after going through all of that, it will say, oh, maybe I have missed something because I focus on things like wars. What about culture? What about other entertainment effects? So it kind of mimics the process that goes inside a human brain of answering this complex question. I think before OpenAI O1, most of the models will hide these processes, or maybe they don't go through this process at all. But then as models started to realize that people actually appreciate seeing what's going on like within the models, they started to show that like transparently. And R1 is an example of doing that really well.
As I mentioned, I think in the intro, this shot up to #1 on the app and people really started to pay attention. And then we saw this massive tanking of NVIDIA.
You're seeing markets being absolutely eviscerated on news from a company most people have never even heard of.
Let's talk about DeepSeek because it is mind-blowing and it is shaking this entire industry to its core.
Google and Microsoft take a hit as well. And like, why? So explain to me that freak out.
Sure. I think the important background here is that So far, up to before DeepSeek R1 was released, uh, most people have believed that there's one certain pathway for AI to become more powerful and capable, and that is to buy more computer chips to train the AI model on more chips for a longer period of time. And just through this scaling effect, the AI models are just going to be better and better.
Hmm.
The good thing about that kind of belief is that it's a very reliable pathway. It's like if you just follow what the instructions, you're gonna get a better AI over time. But what happens with DeepSeek is that when DeepSeek released its R1 model and people started to realize that, oh, it actually performs really well, it also released quite a few papers, academic papers, explaining how it reached here. And that includes explaining how it trained its model with a surprisingly small budget. And at that point, people started to realize actually there isn't just this one way of getting more powerful AI model. If you focus on, for example, making the training process more efficient or some innovative architecture within the model, then maybe you don't need that many chips or that long like a training time. So this kind of questions established belief in the AI industry. And I think that's what caused a really large shock in the market.
Right. And fair for me to say, when we're talking, they did it a lot cheaper. Like we're talking about 6 million, so they say, versus hundreds of millions of dollars, right? And these chips that we're talking about, like they're produced by NVIDIA, and then these enormous data centers owned by Microsoft and Google. So that's why those companies just started to see that sell off, right?
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do think there are some nuances with that 6 million number. A lot of people just take it for granted. But yeah, the fact is that people realize that you can train the models for a lot cheaper.
Okay. So does this ultimately upend this billion-dollar industry that has been created around developing AI?
I wouldn't say completely disrupted because first thing to know that, well, DeepSeek still has to use these NVIDIA chips, like they admitted themselves, to train their R1 model. So it's not like, oh, with some like new innovative techniques, you can just get rid of the NVIDIA chips completely. That's not true. And the other thing is that I've started to see more people reason that what DeepSeek has done, it's really to propose a more efficient way to use whatever chips you have. And at that point, if you have 1,000 chips, you're still going to have a model that's better than someone with 100 chips.
Mm.
So it's not to say that the scaling effect doesn't exist anymore. It's more like it's not that simple, and we can put in more resources into other things to change the efficiency of training. But still, like the number of chips you have or the resource, the money you have, is still a very important factor in making a good model.
Hey guys, we're going to be back to the show in a second, but if I could just ask you a favor, if you could hit that follow button, if you could give us a follow. I know I've been asking you that a lot lately, but it's super helpful for us, and hopefully it helps you too. Okay, back in a second. DeepSeek released this latest model as open source, right?
Mhm.
Just explain to me what that is and why it was significant.
Yeah, so I think there has long been this kind of uh, divergence within the AI industry as to closed source and open source. With closed source, we're mostly looking at companies like OpenAI, Microsoft, and Google, because they invested a lot of resources and talents into making their own models. They're not gonna open the model up to everyone to use it. They're charging people a fee to use their kind of most advanced models. On the other hand, we're seeing companies like Meta or quite a few Chinese companies, including DeepSeek or the Chinese tech giant like Alibaba, who have chosen this more open source route. So when they kind of like come up with a really powerful model, they will decide to put that model online for anyone to download and test it and run it by themselves. And in this way, they're giving up a lot of control. Like they
Yeah.
cannot charge you anymore, right, for using that model.
Yeah, why would they do that?
The reason why they want to do that is that, first of all, they started a little bit late. Like OpenAI was already the leader. If they want to catch up, they need to find out some other ways. And providing your models for free is a really good way to attract more attention from the industry, and also to get more users to just try to use it, to test it, and to maybe collaborate with you.
Hmm.
And those kind of advice can really help the company itself catch up faster. So that is one way for a lot of companies to decide that, okay, we're not going to catch up with OpenAI through a traditional commercial way. So we're going to try to find out another way to have more people just willingly collaborate with us and help us grow.
Are there concerns that people could use that, uh, for evil? Like, right? Are there
Yeah.
security concerns with that?
Yeah, I think the way that these models have been shared under certain open source license is that if you are someone who downloaded the model and did it for malicious purposes, you are the one responsible for it. The companies themselves, they're giving it out there, but they're also making sure that they're not the one who will be legally responsible for that. And I think there has been kind of like an established open source community rules, so people won't really go after the company for releasing one and for other people to do something wrong. So in that way, it's not completely reliable. The companies are not completely responsible for it.
Right.
And I do think there's another thing to notice here, which is that there's a separate set of law in China to regulate the AI companies, and they do put this AI companies under very strict regulations. However, they also sort of carve out some space there. They're like, if you're releasing a model for like scientific research, or you're releasing it not to general public, but only to people who are kind of like very savvy enough in technology, then you're not going to subject to like a strict scrutiny or legal responsibility in there.
Could it, um, I guess the question I have is, could it be bad for humanity?
Well, that's a good question.
Is it?
I feel like
I don't know. Yeah.
I think that is actually a very hard question to answer, because a lot of times with this open source model, what's happening is that there are already a lot of models out there. Even if this company doesn't release another one, if you are someone with malicious intent, you can probably find another one for that. So I guess the marginal responsibility there is ignorable. I don't know, but that's what I'm thinking right now.
Yeah. Um, I also wanted to ask you, because you were talking about the Chinese government and the guardrails that they put on these companies.
Hmm.
I've also heard people concerned about this model in particular. Like, for example, I saw that if you asked it about Tiananmen Square, like, just won't reply to you. Or I think somebody tried to ask it about the Uyghurs, and the response was that
Hmm.
China is a multi-ethnic society where its entire population is has equal rights, right? Obviously, that's not true. So, just are there legitimate concerns about that?
Definitely. I think this applies to every single Chinese model out there, which is that they are um, subject to a set of different content moderation rules. They're very specific to the Chinese context. And a lot of times we're talking about these models cannot talk about political sensitive situations. They cannot talk about kind of like territorial disputes in China, or the political movement, protest movements, all of things like that. So personally, I was not surprised at all that DeepSeek also has some kind of censorship mechanisms when user tries to prompt it with this kind of questions. I do think there's a difference here, that because DeepSeek is open source, there's a lot more possibility to tweak with the model and try to get it to censor less. So I think one thing for the open source AI community to figure out is that there is this model out there, and we know it has this drawback of censoring political information. Can we actually modify it so it doesn't do that anymore? I think it's a tall task, but it's worth trying.
I just want to situate this conversation in this broader context of this larger global tech war, right? Largely between the United States and China.
Mhm.
Um, Trump seemed, I think it's fair to say, a bit blindsided by the rise of DeepSeek.
The release of DeepSeek AI from a Chinese company should be a wake-up call for our industries, that we need to be laser focused on competing to win, because we have the
Just for our listeners, could you just briefly talk to me a bit about this so-called, I've heard it called like a Cold War, between the U.S. and China when it comes to developing AI and what we've seen in recent years?
Yeah, I think this like Cold War interaction has really defined the U.S.-China relations in the past, I would say 2 to 3 years. Um, we're talking about how those companies feel like they have to come up ahead of the other one in terms of the key technologies, and AI is definitely the one that both countries are paying their most attention to right now. And specifically, we're talking about the US government and US companies really want to make sure that the American AI models are performing much better than the Chinese ones. And so far, like until DeepSeek, I think most people agree that that's true. Like Chinese models are just not as good as the Western ones. And usually when a Western model first introduces a feature, it will take a few months or even a year for their Chinese counterpart to come up with a similar one.
Mm.
And I think that kind of status quo uh, has made a lot of people like comfortable feeling that, well, the US still leading in this field. What's happening with DeepSeek is that DeepSeek R1 really is rivals OpenAI's O1 in a lot of the key reasoning and math benchmarks. And I think a lot of people are just kind of scared and surprised by that.
Hmm.
And that kind of just changes the like their calculation of like how long does it take China to catch up.
Right. I've seen people make the argument that the breakthrough that DeepSeek made was actually like the unintended consequence of the trade war. That essentially DeepSeek was forced to innovate because the U.S. had banned uh, the export of high end processing chips, right? So like they couldn't get them, so they had to kind of work around it. What do you make of that?
Mhm. That I think that's a reasonable explanation of what happened, because I think this really happened under the Biden administration, where they started to put this like chip export control against China. So we're talking about they're restricting the most advanced GPUs from being exported to China and help the Chinese companies grow their AI models. And DeepSeek's innovation is really kind of inspired by that. Because DeepSeek as a company knows that I'm not going to get an infinite supply of GPUs like OpenAI has. So what I really need to do is focus on, can I circumvent the obstacle by coming up with like software focused innovations or coming up with some like more scientific research that helps my model grow. So it's kind of like an innovation born out of necessity. And that's always been the criticism to the export control for in the recent years, because people are saying that yes, you are cutting off a very important pathway to AI to Chinese advance on AI, but there are other pathways out there, and you're just encouraging them to figure out these other pathways. And I do think DeepSeek's success in some way proof that it's possible to find those alternative pathways, but we're still waiting to figure out like how effective these alternative pathways are.
I also wanted to ask you about Stargate, right? This is this initiative that Trump recently announced alongside all of these tech CEOs, including OpenAI's Sam Altman.
Together, these world-leading technology giants are announcing the formation of Stargate. So put that name down in your books, because I think you're going to hear a lot about it in the future. A new American company that will invest $500 billion at least in AI infrastructure in the United States, and very, very quickly, moving very rapidly.
The idea being that they want to, ramp it up. And do you think that project, Stargate, will go ahead as planned? Is it going to change now?
Well, I think even before DeepSeek became the talk of town, there will have been a lot of suspicions to Stargate, right? And I think it goes back to this idea that Stargate is a example, it's a culmination of this belief that the more chips you have, the more data centers you have, the more powerful your AI will be.
Mm-hmm.
And up until DeepSeek, there hasn't really been a challenging narrative on that. So that's why I think a lot of people, there is a lot of genuine support for a project like Stargate that really kind of like concentrates the resources, the money, and the talents towards kind of getting more chips and building more powerful AI. At the same time, I think there are a lot of criticism to that too, because when you are building data centers, when you are piling up these compute resources, you are also kind of, it also has that environmental effects.
Yeah.
It also like endangers the other research that could use those resources, right? So I think what DeepSeek has provided at this moment is an evidence for these other arguments that, well, yes, like maybe we can achieve like AI supremacy through your Stargate way, but you're asking us to forget all of this like counter effects out there. But maybe there's another way. Maybe if we follow kind of the more model efficiency pathway, we don't need to spend so much money and so much, I guess, resources on a Stargate project like this. And I think that will prompt more kind of like counter arguments out there. Which is what prompts me to believe that it will be really hard for OpenAI to carry out Stargate as it wants to be. But still, they have a lot of political support, so maybe they can pull it off.
Okay. And just since I have you here, I wonder if I could end this conversation by asking you like a bigger picture question, because look, like it seems to me, at least, that a Chinese AI company has done something really interesting in terms of process and cost. But there are these other big questions lingering about whether AI can surpass its current use case, right? Or current utility. In other words, can it get better? Or I guess worse for people who think that we're headed towards a dystopia. And does this get us closer to that answer?
So the founder of DeepSeek, Liao Wenfeng, he's basically in the same age as Sam Altman. And it also strikes me that he has probably very similar beliefs with Sam Altman. He's a firm believer of AGI, which means that AI at some point will just completely surpass human in terms of like their reasoning, their all kinds of abilities. And the reason why he has kind of dedicated so much resources and built up a team to build DeepSeek is that he believes that AGI is achievable. So in some way, the success of DeepSeek proves that there's still this very strong belief in the AI industry that we should build like the most powerful AI ever, and it will solve a lot of the problem in this society. Even though DeepSeek provides a more efficient way to get there, I don't think it kind of changes the direction that it's heading to.
Right.
I feel like if we want more kind of resistance to the narrative, or if we want more kind of other alternatives out there, it might not come from DeepSeek.
Okay. Zui, this was really interesting. Thank you so much for this.
Of course, glad to help.
All right, so before we go today, Trump's Commerce Secretary pick was asked during a Senate committee hearing on Wednesday if he would maintain U.S. AI leadership. Howard Lutnick responded by saying that DeepSeek had stolen U.S. technology to create a dirt-cheap model and said that he would impose new restrictions on China. They stole things, they broke in, they've taken our IP, Lutnick said of China, adding, "I'm going to be rigorous in our pursuit of restrictions and enforcing those restrictions to keep us in the lead because we must stay in the lead." All right, that is all for today. I'm Jamie Poisson. Thanks so much for listening. Talk to you tomorrow.